Hi, this is Keith Williams. Welcome to 5 Watt World, where we're interested in helping you get the most music from the least gear. Gibson's bid to show that they could innovate and compete with all the new ideas coming out of Fender resulted in two of the most radical guitar shapes yet seen by the world, the Flying V and the Explorer. If you've already watched the 5 Watt World history of the Flying V, then this is the inevitable sister history, the Gibson Explorer. The rarest of vintage guitars, much more valuable than even the fabled Bursts from the same year. The Explorer is the most coveted and copied of the late 50s Gibsons. If you want to hear the whole story, then stay tuned, because this is the 5 Watt World short history of the Gibson Explorer. If you enjoy our videos, take a minute to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when we put out new videos. If you've already subscribed, swing by the store and grab a t-shirt or a mug to support what we're doing here. And if you don't need another t-shirt, but want to support us even more, consider becoming a friend of 5 Watt. The links are in the description. Gibson Musical Instruments was founded in 1902 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. As guitars became more popular in the late 20s and 30s, Gibson began building archtop guitars with their first ES, or electric Spanish, guitars in 1936 with the ES 150. In 1944, the Chicago Musical Instrument Company bought a controlling interest in Gibson, and while manufacturing remained in Kalamazoo, the new sales and administration headquarters was moved to Chicago. An important character in our story of the Explorer, Ted McCarty, joined the company in 1948 and became president of the company in 1950. So Ted was already president of Gibson when Leo launched his first electric solid-body guitars out in Fullerton, California. Though McCarty's initial feeling was to ignore the newfangled solid body, once Fender started to sell guitars, Gibson changed their mind and launched their Les Paul in 1952. By 1957, the pressure from Fender's rapid pace of innovation had Gibson feeling like they needed to do something big to reestablish themselves as the industry leader. The Stratocaster had been introduced in 1954 and had moved away from the traditional single-cut guitar shapes that had even echoed in the new solid-body guitars. Fender's marketing folks even capitalized on the space-age theme of the 50s with the name Stratocaster. So Gibson decided to show Fender that they could surprise the world, and in the spring of 1957, McCarty put together a team to come up with a plan to build 3 new models. They dubbed them the Modernistics series, and they were supposed to put Gibson's stodgy reputation to rest once and for all. Looking ahead to the Summer NAMM trade show, Ted told the group, "Let's make some guitars that are so outlandish they'll cause a stir at the show. We'll prove to Leo that we can make something different." The 3 proposed models would become known as the Flying V, the Explorer, and the Moderne. In an interview with guitar historian Tony Bacon, McCarty said that there were 3 or 4 people on the design team, plus himself. Ted's main role was leadership, but he certainly had much to say in which 3 of the more than 13 original submitted designs were chosen. The team likely included John House, Gibson's head of production, and McCarty's right-hand man, Larry Allers, who was the company's chief woodworking engineer at the time, and likely Rem Wall, who was, quote, one of the guitar players, end quote, in final assembly. According to Gil Hembree's Gibson Guitars Ted McCarty's Golden Era, Allers is likely the biggest unsung hero in the late 50s Gibson years. Allers was in charge of building prototypes and in what Gibson called the Whitewood shop. He oversaw the pattern makers and the machine shop. He organized the fabrication work on the modernistic guitars, selecting a builder and giving him the instructions on what to build. According to Hembree, quote, not only did Larry supervise, explain, and coordinate, but also he would have done some of the most difficult handwork on the designs. In June of 1957, Gibson filed 3 new patent applications. These were ornamental design patents, illustrations of each guitar showing a front and side view. This was an unusual thing for Gibson, as they were more commonly filed invention patents for unique mechanical or electrical inventions like their humbucking pickups. It seems that this may have been in reaction to Leo Fender having filed design patents for the Telecaster and precision bass. It seems that McCarty believed that Fender might try to put out their own versions of these 3 new innovative body styles. At the Summer '57 NAMM show in Chicago, the sales team had a rough, early version of the Futura, which would later be renamed the Explorer, at the show. There's just one photo of this Explorer-style guitar, and it's the single photographic evidence of the modernistic guitars at the '57 NAMM show. It's believed that the V prototype was also there so that McCarty could get feedback from the dealers visiting the Gibson suite. This dealer reaction often dictated if a guitar was put into production, and it's been surmised that the V and Explorer did well, but the reaction to the images of the Moderne were not as positive, and that's why the guitar was never produced. The Flying V came first and received the most press attention up front, but on May 7, 1958, Gibson sent a letter to their dealers along with the new catalog. The letter was designed to focus the dealer's attention on specific points in the catalog, and at the top of the list were the modernistic design guitars. The dealers had previously seen pictures of the V, but then came some startling news. The letter read, "Then there's the Explorer, another ultra-modern design. This guitar is so new you won't find it in the catalog, but it is featured in the April-May issue of the Gibson Gazette, mailed a few days ago." The Gazette was Gibson's promotional company magazine, and on page 6 of that issue, next to the now familiar V, was the first image of the brand new Explorer. The Gazette copy followed up with the standard company language about the modernistic line. The impressive appearance of either modernistic guitar would be a real asset to the combo musician with a flair for showmanship. Engineering of both instruments is identical. They are dissimilar in shape only. It's believed that the delay in launching the Explorer was due to modifications that Gibson made to the earlier prototype, known as the Futura, and its name may have been inspired by the launch of America's first satellite, Explorer 1. Once again, guitar historian Tony Bacon puts it best. The outcome was the most remarkable guitar design of the 50s, an uncompromising study in offset rectangles. The shape of the Explorer, though radical, was not out of step with what you'd see in 1950s designs in furniture, automobiles, or even in a man's bow tie. One of the reasons I haven't made this video earlier is that due to the incredible rarity of these guitars, photos of them are equally scarce. My research led me to Dave Rogers at Dave's Guitar in Wisconsin, who owns an authentic 59, perhaps one of the rarest guitars on earth. He generously had his photographer, Tim Mullally, take these incredibly detailed pictures of that amazing guitar for me. Beside Dave Rogers' 59, there might be just 7 or 8 other known surviving Explorers, and of those, I could only find a few images of each. As the Gazette put it, the general construction of the Explorer was very similar to the V. A Carina body, one-piece Carina neck, 22-fret rosewood fingerboard, dot markers, and the typical 24 3/4 inch scale length. The guitar followed the standard Gibson formula of a glued-in, tight, mortise and tenon neck joint. Like the Flying V, it had a 3-control knob layout of 2 volumes and 1 master tone control. The serial number was inked on the back of the headstock under clear lacquer, the first digit being either 8 or 9 to indicate the year of production. The Explorer had the traditional 2 metal strap buttons, one attached on the shoulder by the neck, and one at the center of the base of the guitar, where you'd find it on a Les Paul. The pickguard was made of triple-layer white, black, white nitrocellulose plastic and was attached with 8 screws. The selector switch was on the pickguard, out on the front of the lower horn. The PAF humbucking pickups were set in injection-molded, butyrate, black plastic mounting rings attached to the body with 4 screws. Unlike the V with its string-through and Cadillac-style tailpiece, the Explorer had a gold-plated, stud-mounted stop bar tailpiece like the Les Paul, along with a tune-o-matic bridge. The output jack was on the bottom edge of the guitar's body. By the time production settled, they'd adopted the now familiar long, drooping-shape headstock dubbed the hockey stick, or scimitar shape. According to Phil Jones, who worked at the Gibson Custom Shop from 1984 to 1999 and is an authority on the modernistic guitars, though the necks were one piece, there was a 1-inch wing strip glued along the bass side where the tuners were, for strength but also because the long grain revealed there looked better than an angled cut grain. This headstock was likely influenced by Fender's single-sided designs, and it certainly adds to the overall radical look of the guitar. Of course, the defining feature of the modernistic guitars is the use of Carina instead of mahogany for the bodies and necks. They were even referred to simply as the Carina guitars. When asked why Carina was used, McCarty said that blonde guitars were popular at the time, and that by using Carina, they could achieve that lighter finish. Fender's Telecaster and Esquire had also had a blonde finish as standard at the time, and at the '57 NAMM show, Fender had displayed a Stratocaster in blonde finish with gold hardware. The name Carina was actually a U.S. trade name for a West African hardwood known as limba. Limba is often compared to mahogany in terms of average weight, tonal characteristics, and how it works in guitar building. Gibson had used Carina for their Skylark lap steel guitars in '57, so it's likely they already had the exotic hardwood in stock at the factory when it came time to shock the world with these new shapes. The shape of the Explorer was at least as radical as the Flying V, but the shape is balanced, and it's another example of the quality of the late '50s Gibson design team. Like the V's, we know very little about the specifics of Explorer production from the middle of '58 onward, because the daybooks, the records of daily production at Gibson for that period, were lost in the transition of manufacturing from the Kalamazoo to the Nashville plant in the mid-'70s. The known daybooks run until June 31st, 1958, and no Explorers were listed, so we must assume that none were produced until after that date. But we still have the end-of-the-year manager's tally sheets for reference. The Explorer is listed there for 1958 as Carina, model guitar, and the number written there is just 19. A tiny number by any standard, even when compared to the 81 Flying V's that were produced that year. For comparison, there were 434 Les Paul Gold Tops that morphed into the Sunbursts during '58. By '59, the failure of the line seemed complete, with just 3 Explorers shipped that year. So a total of just 22 guitars were issued in the introduction years of the Explorer. In '62-63, Gibson assembled and sold a few more from leftover parts, but finished them with contemporary parts like nickel-plated hardware and metal cap knobs. The number of guitars shipped during this cleanup of parts is unknown. A Gibson price list from July 1st, '58 listed the new Explorer as well as the Flying V under the heading Modernistic Guitars, with both guitars priced at $247.50. This was exactly the same price as a Les Paul Gold Top. The same year, a Stratocaster listed for $274.50 and a Telecaster listed for just $199.50. Marv Lamb, who started working in the woodshop at Gibson in '56, remembered, "They were the ugliest things. I think Gibson practically gave them away to get rid of them. They had them hanging around for years." After a pause, he added, "I wish now that I'd taken a few of them for myself." The Gibson promotional literature proclaimed of the two new shapes, either is a surefire hit with guitarists of today. Of course, we now know that that was not the case. And so amazing to us though it may be, the modernistic guitars were dropped from the line at the end of 1959. The late '70s saw the explosion of interest in vintage guitars. Norman's Rare Guitars opened in Los Angeles, and George Gruen opened his store in Nashville and wrote articles for Guitar Player magazine that extolled the advantages of vintage instruments. Gibson even published a book, The Gibson Story, in 1973. The book wasn't particularly well researched, but it took a minute to mention that musicians had been requesting to buy, quote, previously discontinued models, end quote. It was around this time that they issued the Medallion Flying V and Firebird guitars. Price lists for Gruen's during that time period listed the occasional Explorer at around $4,000. And all of this demand for the playability and the look of vintage instruments is what led to what are often politely referred to now as conversion or the replica guitars. It was around the same time that John Danzig, Paul Hamer, and Craig Hendy opened a vintage shop, Northern Prairie Music, just north of Chicago. They soon connected with John Montgomery, a local repairman, and Danzig began learning how to fix and build guitars. They built a few V's, and another Chicago builder, Jim Beach, built a couple of Explorer replicas that were sold out of their shop. Danzig and Hamer would talk their way backstage at rock shows to show the artists their replica guitars. They'd built a maple-topped Explorer that they'd often bring along. This was how the Hamer Guitar Company began, and their maple-topped Explorer morphed into their first model, the Standard. The pointy guitars became a flag of rebellion for the players in the '70s, and the artist roster at Hamer grew quickly and included Martin Barr of Jethro Tull, Mick Ralphs of Bad Company, and Rick Nielsen and Robin Zander from Cheap Trick. Hamer built their company on building the guitars that Gibson should have been building if they'd been listening to what the musicians wanted to play. One of the most prominent custom builders at this time was Max Barnett, who built instruments in California from '70s through the '90s. Though his reputation looms large, he downplays the number of instruments he built, saying, "There are way less than 100, and that includes Flying V's, Explorers, Strats, Tellys, and Les Pauls." Meticulously built by hand, the copies made by Barnett, Mike Stevens in Texas, and Rex Bogue were exacting in nearly every detail. My buddy and 5-Watt World editor, Dave Honorato, owns a Max Barnett Explorer. I've handled the guitar, and I was bowled over by the wood alone, let alone the fact that the hardware and PAF pickups had been sourced from a late '50s ES-355. Barnett's attention to detail went so far as to track down Carina imported in the late '50s, perhaps even from the same importer that Gibson had used. So even the wood in Max's Carina guitars was the same age and grade as the original Gibsons. Honorato's guitar has original hardware and PAF pickups from that '58 355. Even the smallest details, like the pickup rings, the truss rod cover, and the period-correct white chiclet tone capacitor, are from the 50s. The neck is the perfect 58D shape, and Dave said, quote, "The guitar plugged in is a religious experience. The body rings like a piano. It is so huge." So much of the guitar actually started life in the 50s. The fact that it is a replica built in 1997 is kind of hard to get your head around. For these reasons, very few people are able to verify the authenticity of the original 50s guitars. Having had a chance to handle and take measurements from many of the original instruments instead of working from secondhand sources, one of those people is our new friend and Carina expert, Phil Jones. Phil pointed out that one of the defining characteristics of an authentic Gibson Explorer is often overlooked: the unusual angle of the headstock. Because the hockey stick headstock shape is so long, if Gibson had used their traditional 17-degree headstock angle, they would have had to use a much thicker piece of wood to make the one-piece necks. So the headstock is actually 14 degrees on the originals, instead of the more traditional 17 degrees that you'd see on Les Pauls. This is a detail that seems to have been missed in the replicas. Dave Honorato added that it's often a tip-off if a vintage guitar doesn't have an original case. Some copies of Avira Explorers have them, but the majority do not. A famous example of the problem with authenticity is a photo in the A.R. Duchessoir's early guitar history book, Gibson Electric's The Classic Years, where the Gibson shown as an original 58 Explorer is actually a copy. This very guitar was presented at Grun's for appraisal not once but twice in the 80s and 90s, and both times it had been sold to the owners as an original Explorer. All of these copies have led us to a world where there are many, many more Explorers claiming to be authentic than were ever built by Gibson in the first place. And this includes many guitars owned by very famous players. Rick Nielsen would end up being the poster boy for Hamer guitars, playing endless custom Hamer Explorer-shaped guitars with Cheap Trick. As it happens, Nielsen bought his own original 58 Explorer from Grun's around the same time he got his first Hamer Standard, 1975. He paid around $4,000 for that first 58. A year or more later, he bought his second from the shop Strings West in Tulsa, Oklahoma, trading a few guitars in cash worth about $7,000. And this is how Nielsen became one of the few men on the planet to own not one, but two of the rarest production guitars ever made. He also has a guitar with the split headstock of the Futura. The dealer he bought it from said it was one of Max Barnett's guitars, but Nielsen called Max, and Max said he didn't build it. Nielsen put it casually, so maybe it is real. And maybe Nielsen owns 3 original Explorers. Dean Zielinski launched the Dean Guitar Company in 1976 at just 19 years old. His first 3 models were the V, the Z, and the ML. The first 2 were copies of the Flying V and the Explorer. Like Hamer, he put fancy maple tops on the guitars, and he added a large V-shaped signature headstock. He took his guitars to Winter NAMM in 1977, as the guitar world was exploding. Dean said, quote, "A lot of people, Seymour Duncan, DiMarzio, Wayne Charvel, B.C. Rich, Hamer, were all showing for the first time at NAMM around then. It was a historical time in the music business. There was a surge in new pickups and parts and new guitar brands." Zielinski took $40,000 worth of orders at the show, but like any new guitar company, he was struggling with being seen as legitimate in the industry. This was solved when Kerry Livgren of Kansas bought the 13th Dean guitar built. Kansas was flying high on their Left Overture album, and this put Dean guitars in front of a world clamoring for the live experience of Carry On My Wayward Son. Going into the 80s, the Doobie Brothers, the Cars, Heart, Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, and ZZ Top were all seen playing Dean guitars. There were corporate replicas of the Explorers as well from companies other than the new startups. Ibanez, for one, built many V and Explorer-style guitars and even released a Modern-style guitar. But many top artists were still looking for original guitars. Around 1974, Eric Clapton got an original Explorer. I've heard the story both ways. One, that Clapton modified the guitar, then gave it to Junior Marvin, who had just joined Bob Marley's Wailers. Marvin sold the guitar to a collector in 1980. Or that when Clapton learned that the guitar he'd bought had been chopped up, he got rid of it and bought his second Explorer, which was near mint and original. He sold the second guitar at auction in 1999 to benefit his Crossroads Foundation for $134,500. Also around this time, Rick Derringer acquired an original Explorer, one of the rarest early ones with a split headstock. He played the guitar live with Johnny Winter and used it on sessions with Steely Dan, Todd Rundgren, and many others. Eventually, Derringer had Rex Bogue build him a copy of the guitar so that he could retire the original from the road. The original guitar eventually found its way into the collection of Scott Chinnery. Leonard Skinner co-founder Alan Collins began on a Firebird, but jumped at the chance to buy an original 58 Explorer from Eric Clapton in 1976. It became his main guitar for the rest of his days. In 2003, Gibson did a limited run of 100 guitars based on that Collins Explorer. By 1975, Gibson had moved its solid-body guitar manufacturing to the new plant in Nashville, and after building some 60s-style Vs in the late 70s, they finally turned their attention to producing Explorer again. These early production first-year models were made as limited editions, and the model was successful at the reintroduction. According to Gibson's shipping totals, 1,835 guitars were shipped in '76. The guitars were offered in natural, wine red, white, and black. It's not clear how many of the '76 Explorers were labeled as limited edition, though, as Gibson's records do not differentiate between the models in that year. They were all mahogany guitars and have a one-piece mahogany neck. Like the 1976 bicentennial instruments that followed, Gibson continued that model Explorer beyond '76, building and selling them until 1979. In 1978, 17-year-old David Howell Evans, later to be known simply as The Edge, was on vacation in the States with his parents. On the hunt for a guitar, he went into Stuyvesant Music in New York, looking to buy a Les Paul to play with the guys at school that had recently pulled a band together. Instead, he found himself drawn to the sound of a 1976 Explorer. He paid the high price of $248 and took it home to Ireland, worried all the while of what his bandmates might say about this unusual-looking guitar. In the end, they weren't sure of the look, but they loved the sound. He went on to use that guitar on every early studio recording that U2 made, and he played it at endless shows. In the mid-'80s, it had a headstock break, and his guitar tech, Dallas Shue, began encouraging him to leave it at home when the band went out on tour. So they went looking for a backup, but this proved difficult because in '76, Gibson produced two very different Explorers. The guitars from the first half of the year have a thicker 50s-style neck, and that's what the Edge wanted. The guitars in the second half of the year have a more 60s-sized neck. But find one they did, and in 2008 he decided to auction off his beloved '76 Explorer to benefit a charity that was helping to replace instruments lost in Hurricane Katrina. Contrary to pre-auction estimate of $80,000, the guitar sold for $240,000. In 1979, Gibson also released the E2 Explorer. Brother to the flying V2 guitar, they were notable for their use of maple and walnut laminate bodies and beveling on the edges. They were built until 1983. Gibson overlapped the E2 with a more traditional Explorer as part of their Heritage series, starting in 1981. In fact, they went so far as to release all three of the original modernistic designs in that series at the time. The Explorers in '81, and then the V, and then the never-before-produced Modern in '82. Tim Shaw said the Gibson's Heritage Explorer was very close to the original because Gibson had access to an original 50s Explorer to use as a model. In 1984, they moved the Explorers to the Designer series, adding custom graphics and even an Explorer synthesizer model in '85 with a Roland 700 synth pickup and controls installed. In the '80s, Matthias Jabs of the band Scorpions began proving the advantages of the Explorer, and it has been for the last 40 years now. Known for playing his white guitar on stage, when he finally got another white Explorer as a backup, he wanted to show folks that he had two, so he put 2 stripes of gaff tape on it, and that, then, became his signature look. The 1980s also saw the young members of the band Metallica creating a modern metal of their own. Touring on the back of the success of their Master of Puppets albums, James Hetfield wielded an Explorer as his primary instrument, while Kirk Hammett often played a Flying V or a Jackson Rhodes V guitar. It was an amazing time and a modernistic frontline. Both guitarists moved to playing ESP guitars later in the decade and have played them predominantly since. ESP, or Electric Sound Products, began as a custom shop behind a Tokyo music store in 1975. Growing the business on the back of copying classic American companies, they grew their reputation as a quality alternative to the old-school brands of Fender and Gibson. Besides the boys from Metallica, George Lynch and Ron Wood all endorsed ESP. Gibson introduced a new reissue Explorer out of the custom shop in 1993, the '58 Carina Explorer. Settled in '99, agreeing to, quote, not use the shape and appearance of any of Gibson's Explorer, Flying V, SG, and Les Paul series guitars, end quote, but that their unique versions would be allowed. Their snakebite guitar has been their modified Explorer shape ever since. Around 2000, Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters wielded a black Explorer live, and Gary Moore broke out a white Explorer on his Live at Monsters Rock album and concert DVD, showing all the different types of tunes that can be played on the venerable Explorer. In '94, Gibson moved the Explorer along with the V to its historic collection to pull them into the same program as the reissue Les Paul models being built then. The Explorer has stayed in the custom shop catalog from those first guitars in the early '90s until today. The current Gibson catalog has 3 Explorer models, all based more or less around the '76 mahogany guitars in natural, classic white, and satin ebony. Even today, the Explorer seems like a guitar that's hard to imagine. Where did the idea ever come from? Phil Jones told me that the shape of the V was from the swept-back wings of the then-new jet planes, but the Explorer shape came from the bow ties that were in fashion with businessmen in the 50s. And I'll admit that seemed far-fetched, even coming from as august an authority as Phil. Until I watched multiple clips of Rick Nielsen from the late 70s rocking out his Explorer during Cheap Trick's live at Budokan, replete in cardigan and a bow tie. Then Phil's words came echoing back as completely true. I need to thank Phil Jones for again offering his time to talk about the modernistic guitars and for fact-checking the script. It's been great getting to know one of the world's experts on the Carina guitars. I need to thank Dave Honorato for sharing his expertise and the pictures of his Max Barnett Explorer. It's one of the nicest guitars I've ever held in my own hands. This video would not have been possible without Tony Bacon's excellent book, Flying V Explorer Firebird. The book is available online from multiple retailers. I need to specifically thank Tim Mullally, photographer at Dave's Guitars, for going above and beyond capturing the images of their '59 Explorer. And finally, I need to thank Dave Rogers of Dave's Guitar in Wisconsin for generously sharing the pics of his original '59 Explorer. I called him out of the blue, and he was a prince. He literally helped make this video possible. If you have your own Explorer story, please share it in the comments and let me know what I missed. I know I can count on you. Remember, if you want to further support 5 Watt World, stop by the store and grab a t-shirt or a mug. And if you don't need another t-shirt, but you want to support us even more, consider becoming a friend of 5 Watt. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Until next time, thanks for being a part of the 5 Watt World.